Fordham, adjunct professor of history at Charleston Southern University, as well as the Citadel, and I'm here to give you this evening a message from the wise storytellers. One of my favorite videos on YouTube is a video made in the early 1930s from Ireland. It's called A Night of Storytelling. In Ireland, they have this great tradition of people called the Senachie, who are storytellers, who basically pass down the wisdom of their ancestors. And in the video made in the 1930s, they're speaking in a very archaic Irish language, and they use subtitles to pass down some stories to a group of people around a fire that have been passed down for thousands of years. And so, therefore, and that's part of a worldwide tradition. In England, they have the wandering minstrels who would ride around on donkeys and play mandolins and sing songs about Robin Hood and Barbara Allen and all of that. And in Africa, of course, they had the griots of the West Coast who passed down the stories of kings and queens and villages and all of that. And I've discussed that in a previous video. And in America, that whole tradition continued when the enslaved children of the griots were brought to America. Up until about maybe 50 years ago, you would find these wise old people who told stories of almost every family in the neighborhood and passed down a whole lot of folk wisdom. And one of the books that captures this is the annotated book of African American folk tales by Dr. Henry Louis Gates and the great writer Zora Neale Hurston, as well as this book, Black Folk Tales by Julius Lester. And that book contains a story that I think is worth repeating tonight. In the book, Julius Lester takes this old story that even I used to hear when I was a boy from the elders that went like this. During the days of slavery, there was a man called High John the Conqueror. And one day his slave master told him that he had made a bet with the other slave owner. He said, "Yeah? How's that bet go?" He says, "Well, you see, here's the thing. I bet him that you could beat his other slave in a fight." He goes, "Oh, really?" He says, "Yeah. So, therefore, if I win, I'm going to get a whole other plantation." "Oh, really?" he said. "Well, now, let's kind of sweeten up the pot a little bit." "Sweeten up the pot? What are you talking about, John?" "Well, you see, master, it's like this. Let's say that you bet him that I could beat this guy, and you get the plantation, right?" "Yeah, and what are you getting at with this?" "Well, we're going to sweeten the pot a little bit. Along with you getting that plantation and his other slaves, you set me and my family free." "What? What are you talking about?" "Hey, now, wait a minute. Don't you think that would make me fight even harder and better in this fight?" "Well, now that you mention it, yeah, so let's do about that. Shake on it, all right?" "Okay, shake." So they shook on it. Then, the day of the fight, everybody gathered around. The slave master and the other guy's owner was there just waiting for the fight to begin. And John was up there ready to get started because he knew that if he beat this guy, he and his family would be free. But all of a sudden, the sky started to get dark. And they heard a boom, 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 boom. And the guy was so big that the sky started to get dark as he came through. And when he stomped his feet, the ground shook. And John looked at the guy who was supposed to fight and went, "Uh-oh." So he came up with a solution. High John the Conqueror went over to the master's wife and slapped her in the mouth. Pow! And all of a sudden, the slave who was all big and bad and everything, he saw this and went, "Ah!" and ran off. So then the master took his pistol and went over to John, put the gun by John, and said, "Look here, boy, what you mean by slapping my wife like that? You got 10 seconds to explain yourself." "Well," John said, "you're not going to shoot me. You know why?" "And why is that?" "Because you won." "Huh?" "Yeah. You see, this guy was defeated. He ran off, which means I won the fight, and you win this guy's other plantation. I get my freedom." "Well, how you figure that, John?" "Simple. He knew that if I was bad enough to slap a white lady, he knew what I would do to him." So John was freed. Now, the moral of that story is fairly simple and one that I think is important to young people today. And that is that the most important weapon that you could have is in your head and not in your hands. And back in the days when our ancestors were forbidden the art of the written word, they taught through stories like that through the spoken word of the mind, you see, which goes to show you that just because a person may be technically illiterate, that doesn't make them ignorant. And there's a lot to unpack in that story. This is Damon Fordham.